In 2009, Sam Worthington became the face of the biggest movie on Earth. Avatar was a planet-sized phenomenon, the kind of film that rewrites box office records and turns unknown actors into household names overnight. Hollywood executives looked at Worthington and saw the future, a rugged, everyman action star. Studios handed him blockbuster after blockbuster. And then something bizarre happened. Almost every attempt to turn him into a genuine movie star failed. Within a few years, the star of the highest-grossing film in history had practically disappeared from Hollywood. So how does someone star in the biggest movie ever made and still experience a career downfall? The answer is about something that reveals how modern Hollywood actually works. To understand how that happened, you first have to go back to a time when Sam Worthington wasn't a name anyone recognized. Sam Worthington grew up in Australia, bounced around schools, and eventually picked up work as a construction worker. For a while, it seemed like that might be his life, but he wanted something else: acting. He landed a few roles in local films, but nothing that suggested he was about to conquer the world. In fact, if you had told anyone in 2007 that this relatively unknown actor would soon headline 3 massive studio franchises, they would have laughed. Then came the phone calls. Almost overnight, Sam Worthington went from an anonymous actor to Hollywood's most important experiment. The industry had decided, this is our next action hero. The years 2009 and 2010 were, in retrospect, the peak of the Sam Worthington experiment. 3 movies, 3 franchises, hundreds of millions of dollars in studio investment, and for a brief, shining moment, it looked like Hollywood had pulled off the impossible. Avatar arrived first, December 2009. The budget was astronomical. The expectations were even higher. And somehow, the film exceeded every single one of them. Nearly $2.8 billion worldwide, a cultural phenomenon that dominated conversations for months. People went back to the theaters 3, 4, 5 times just to experience Pandora again. Sam Worthington's face was everywhere. Then came Terminator Salvation, a darker, grittier reboot of the Arnold Schwarzenegger franchise. It didn't make Avatar money, but it was a commercial success, grossing nearly $400 million worldwide. More importantly, it showed that Worthington could anchor a different kind of blockbuster. He wasn't just the blue guy, he could also be the post-apocalyptic resistance fighter. Then, Clash of the Titans, another massive studio investment and franchise launch. The film made nearly $500 million worldwide, proving that Worthington's name alone could open movies in nearly every territory. Sam Worthington was supposed to dominate the next decade of blockbuster cinema. There was only one problem that nobody wanted to admit. The audience wasn't falling in love with Sam Worthington. They were falling in love with the movies. Worthington was the vessel, not the destination. And when those franchises started to fade, the difference would become impossible to ignore. Even as the box office numbers piled up, a quieter, more troubling narrative was taking shape behind the scenes. Critics weren't raving about Sam Worthington the way they raved about, say, a young Russell Crowe or a breakout Mel Gibson. The reviews for his performances were polite at best, generic, functional, a solid presence but nothing special. Words that sound like compliments but actually mean, we don't remember this guy 5 minutes after leaving the theater. Audiences noticed it too, even if they couldn't articulate it. People remembered Avatar, but when asked about the actor who played Jake Sully, many viewers drew a blank. The constant comparisons to other stars didn't help. He was called the poor man's Russell Crowe, a less interesting Christian Bale, the action hero with no edges. Every article about him seemed to measure him against someone else, because on his own, he didn't offer a clear brand. Hollywood saw a star, but more and more, audiences saw a placeholder. A guy who could deliver lines and hit his marks, but didn't leave a distinct imprint, and that distinction became the key to understanding his strange downfall. When the franchises started to disappear, that difference became impossible to ignore, and the collapse began sooner than anyone expected. The franchises didn't disappear overnight. They faded, slowly at first, then all at once. Man on a Ledge arrived in 2012. A mid-budget thriller with a catchy premise and a decent supporting cast. This was the kind of movie that a genuine movie star could carry to a respectable $50 or $60 million gross. Something forgettable, but profitable. the kind of film that keeps a career humming between blockbusters. It made $18 million domestically. Worldwide, it barely scraped past $46 million. Against a $42 million budget, that's a disaster. Texas Killing Fields came next, a crime drama directed by Amy Kanan Mann, produced by her famous father, Michael Mann. Worthington played a detective investigating murders along the Gulf Coast. Critical reception was mixed. Box office? Almost non-existent. The film grossed less than $1 million worldwide. The Debt offered a brief respite, a well-reviewed thriller also starring Helen Mirren and Jessica Chastain. But Worthington wasn't the lead. He was part of an ensemble. And the film's $45 million worldwide gross, while respectable, belonged more to Mirren's star power than his. Sabotage, 2014, was supposed to be a comeback. Directed by David Ayer, co-starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. A gritty, violent action thriller with real pedigree. The film cost $35 million. It grossed $17 million worldwide. Critics panned it. Audiences ignored it. But the damage wasn't limited to these titles. Wrath of the Titans, 2012, the sequel to Clash of the Titans, cost $150 million and limped to just $301 million worldwide, a collapse that killed that franchise on the spot. Drift, 2013, an Australian surfing drama that Worthington helped produce, cost $11 million and earned a humiliating $268,000 globally. It failed in his own home country. Kidnapping Mr. Heineken, 2015, landed with a 21% Rotten Tomatoes score and vanished without a trace. Each new release performed worse than the last. The momentum that had carried Worthington through 2009 and 2010 had evaporated completely, and Hollywood, ever cold and calculating, had already started looking for the next experiment. By 2012, the experiment was effectively over. No more $100 million franchise launches. Instead, smaller projects, supporting roles, direct-to-streaming style releases that barely registered in the cultural conversation. Worthington appeared in The Shack, 2017, a faith-based drama that found an audience but didn't elevate his profile. He voiced a character in the Call of Duty video game franchise. He played Captain Glover in Hacksaw Ridge, 2016, a supporting role in Mel Gibson's comeback film. That one actually worked. The movie was nominated for 6 Oscars, but Worthington was a footnote, not the draw. Contrast the headlines of 2010, Hollywood's next superstar, with the reality of 2018. Most people couldn't tell you what Sam Worthington was doing. He was not blacklisted. He simply was not relevant. But here's the part the clean narrative usually leaves out. Worthington wasn't entirely scandal-free. He had his share of incidents, a 2012 bar fight where he pushed a doorman and was pepper-sprayed, facing a disorderly conduct charge. Then, in a 2014 altercation where he punched a photographer who he claimed had kicked his girlfriend. He was charged with assault and faced up to a year in jail. Both cases were eventually dropped or dismissed, but the headlines stuck. Years later, Worthington admitted he'd had a serious drinking problem for a long stretch, something he thought was normal until he got sober. He's been open about it since. Studios can tolerate controversy when the box office is strong. But when the controversies are paired with declining value, the calculation changes. By the time Avatar returned, the industry had already made its quiet judgment. Worthington was just no longer essential. How does the lead actor of Avatar become almost invisible? The answer has less to do with Sam Worthington himself and more to do with the machinery that created him. And that machinery was about to reveal something uncomfortable about the entire franchise era. To understand Sam Worthington's strange career, you have to understand a fundamental shift in how Hollywood creates and consumes celebrity. Compare him to the actors who came before. Tom Cruise, for example. When you buy a ticket for a Tom Cruise movie, you're buying Tom Cruise. The man hanging off a plane, the man running through the streets of Paris. The brand is the actor, not the character. Same with Leonardo DiCaprio. You show up for his intensity, his commitment, his face. Denzel Washington? You know exactly what you're getting. Gravitas, authority, a performance that demands attention. Worthington never developed a persona that audiences craved outside the context of a pre-sold world. He never became a brand himself. And in modern Hollywood, that distinction is everything. Consider the Marvel actors who face the same problem. Chris Evans could barely open a non-superhero movie. Chris Hemsworth's non-Thor films have a brutal track record. Even Tom Holland, Spider-Man himself, saw Chaos Walking collapse at the box office. The pattern is everywhere. Franchises create fame, but not necessarily bankability. Worthington was simply an early, extreme example. And that lesson would become even clearer when Avatar finally returned after more than a decade. For more than a decade, Sam Worthington existed in a strange limbo. Then, James Cameron decided to make 4 Avatar sequels. The Way of Water arrived in 2022, 13 years after the original. The anticipation was massive. The budget was astronomical. And once again, the film became a global phenomenon. Over $2.3 billion worldwide, another cultural event that dominated conversations for months. And Sam Worthington was back. For a few months, it almost felt like 2009 again. Hollywood was suddenly interested. The development slates were dusted off. People talked about Worthington's comeback. But here's what's interesting, and a little uncomfortable. The success still belonged primarily to Avatar, not to Sam Worthington. Audiences returned to Pandora for the water effects, the world building, the spectacle. They returned for James Cameron's vision. They returned because Avatar had become an event franchise, a theatrical experience that demanded to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Did anyone go because they missed Jake Sully? Probably not. So here we are, after more than a decade, 2 of the highest-grossing films in history, and countless attempts to launch him as a leading man, Sam Worthington remains one of Hollywood's most puzzling figures. Avatar didn't fix the underlying problem. It only paused it. Every few years, the franchise returns, and Worthington returns with it. Then Avatar leaves, the spotlight moves elsewhere, and Worthington fades again. That's not a failure of talent. It's a failure of the system that tried to manufacture him into something the audience never actually voted for. Hollywood looked at the box office numbers and assumed the actor was the variable. But the real variable was the spectacle, the world building, the James Cameron of it all. Worthington was along for the ride. He was never driving the bus. The strange downfall of Sam Worthington is a cautionary tale for the franchise era. You can be the face of the biggest movie on Earth. You can be recognized on every continent. But none of that guarantees that audiences will show up when the blue skin comes off and the floating mountains disappear. If you made it this far, you clearly love digging into Hollywood's biggest mysteries. Hit that subscribe button. Watch our videos on why Jason Momoa couldn't succeed outside Aquaman and how the movie star died without anyone noticing.